So today we're going to talk about constructivism and what constructivism is. So I'd like to thank you for sitting through our PowerPoint and for listening to this. So constructivism is a theory of learning, which has to do with meaning making, making connections, and teaching by asking. And so what this means is meaning making is where students can develop their own ideas about concepts. It means you present a question to the student such as, what do you know about subtraction? And they take what they know about subtraction and then they try to come up with their own ideas about the concepts of subtraction, their own ideas of how that works. And so the next idea is that students make connections. So they take what they know about that concept and then they connect it to they're learning about the concept. So they take previous knowledge and connect it to what they're learning now. So making connections is very important in this process. If they cannot make a connection of what they're learning to something that they know, it's A, going to be harder for them to remember, and B, it's going to be hard for them to apply. And so the last big main idea of constructivism is that teachers teach by asking. Traditionally, teachers will pour into students such as sponges, but now in the constructivism approach, the idea is to teach by asking, not by telling. And so now we're going to talk about constructivism foundational theorists. So there's two big theorists in constructivism, and they are John Piaget and Lev Vygotsky. And so Vygotsky has developed this zone of proximal development, which is also known as the ZPD. And so the ZPD basically says that students should work in groups on material that is just challenging enough that they can understand, but there also should be someone around who knows more about the concept to help them go deeper or understand things that they don't fully grasp. And so Vygotsky is also big into the social and cultural aspects of learning. He is a Russian psychologist, and his main thing is how does the people around him, how does the culture and how does the social interactions affect learning. So John Piaget is a Swiss psychologist, and he also puts stress on what students were interested in, and so what they're interested in also affects how they learn. So if the students are interested in a subject, then they will be more welcome to want to learn more about the subject. And so Piaget also had four main concepts in his ideas, and they are assimilation, accommodation, equilibrium, and schemas. And so Piaget's idea is that students will accommodate and assimilate into their new environments. They will assimilate into a new environment with the information that they know, and they will accommodate by adding new ideas into those things that we do know. And so now we're going to talk about differences in traditional versus constructivism in the teaching and learning process. So one main point under the differences in the traditional and constructivism is curriculum. So we're going to talk about what's the traditional idea versus what's the constructivism idea on curriculum. So traditionalists place emphasis on basic skills, and they teach from part to whole. So they teach like a step process, and those steps are the basic skills, and those are the most important parts. And those parts build up to the whole. Well, the constructivism approach is to give them the whole idea, and then teach the parts. So the constructivism approach has a big emphasis on the big concepts. And so in that approach, it is more of, if you have the big concept, you can break it down and get those smaller ideas. And so you have the main concept first, and then you can form your own smaller ideas within that. So the next point that we're going to talk about is how students are viewed in the traditional versus constructivism approach. And so in the traditional way, students are viewed as blank slates or like sponges, and the teacher pours into those students, and they just soak up all the knowledge that the teacher gives to them. In the constructivism approach, students are thought of as independent thinkers, and so because they're thought of as independent thinkers, they can form their own ideas about concepts, their own ideas about how things work and how to get to an answer. So the next idea is how students work in traditional versus constructivist. And so the way students work in a traditional way is that they work primarily alone, and they work, the classroom setting is that they work alone, they work in rows, they work quietly, because they kind of they do worksheets more than they do hands-on things. In a constructivism approach, they work in groups, they work collaboratively, and they work with each other. They are forming their own ideas and opinions based on what they find out together. And so, another thing that we're going to talk about is the teacher's role in the traditional versus the constructivism approach. So the teacher's role in a traditional manner is to deliver the knowledge directly to the students. But a constructivism idea is that the teacher is to facilitate the learning. And so the teacher is to observe that the way that students learn, and they ask ideas and allow them again to form their own opinions. And when they facilitate that learning, they're not just telling them what they need to learn. They're asking questions and allowing students to research those questions and find the answers to the questions on their own. As to where in a traditional way, teachers would deliver the knowledge directly to the students and just pour into them and tell them what they need to know. So the last thing that we're going to talk about in traditional versus constructivism is assessment. And so in assessment, the traditional version is that students are, the way that they're assessed is through mainly testing and through summative assessments, which is students are tested at the end of what they learn, or they're tested in big portions, or it's just they're tested in big ideas, in the big ways. And so the difference in constructivism approach is that teachers will observe, and they will use more formative assessments, which means they will observe more throughout the learning process instead of just at the end. And so another big idea that we're going to talk about in a constructivism idea is the PAR model of learning, and it's PAR, which stands for present, apply, and review. And within this model, it relates to constructivism in the way that it helps promote active learning. You present the material to your students. Mainly, you could ask them questions or things like that, and then you figure out how to apply, or you tell them how they can apply the information that they've discovered, and then you review the information with them. So the present portion of the model is a maximum of 35% of the whole lesson. And so the apply part is a minimum of 60%. So your biggest chunk of this model is applying the concepts. And so they want to review a minimum of 5%. So the review is at the end, and the review can be by asking questions. It could be, I've heard a lot about exit slips, and so you can review the main concepts, and then you give them exit slips just to understand the concepts and how they will and how well that they've learned the concepts. And so now we're going to talk about a constructive teaching example. And so we'll talk about a scenario in which I'm going to use a math talk. And so, and then I'm going to break that down into how we're going to use the PAR model, the PAR model, to teach this scenario. And so we're going to start with the P, and we're talking about the math talk. And so I would present the material by asking what the students know about subtraction. We're going to use subtraction as the scenario, and we're going to ask them what they know about subtraction, and then we're going to follow up with questions on how they get that information, and how they will what they understand about subtraction, what they know about subtraction, and then how did they form that opinion of subtraction. And then we will discuss maybe some ways of how to come up with subtraction, ways to find out information about subtraction. So then we will go to the apply portion of the model. And the apply is, how do we apply subtraction in daily life? How do we apply subtraction in the things that we may do? And so with apply, I may show students that they could use subtraction as with money. Like if a student may need to buy a break item, they have $2, and say a bag of chips is 50 cents. So what will you have left over when you're done? And so that's how we will apply that subtraction method. And so the last part is review. And so for review, I may give each student $3, and they will have a list of items on the board, and within that list of items, we will allow them to I guess, buy things from that list, and then they will tell me what they have left over. So they will have their money, they will have the list of things that they will buy, they will have to add those up, which then again throws in addition to this mix as well. And then they will tell me what they have left over money-wise, which would be their subtraction. And so this is how I would use the PAR model in my classroom, and it works well with constructivism, because the main idea of constructivism is just to promote active learning, and the theory goes mainly about active learning. And so this PAR model promotes the active learning as well. And so that's the main idea about constructivism. It's just a hands-on way of learning, and it's about making connections. So I just thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.